Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and with me today on Podiatry Marketing is my good friend all the way from Canada, Jim McDannald. How you doing today, Jim?
Tyson, doing fantastic. Excited to jump into another episode of Podiatry Marketing. It's been what, 5 in the can, and this is our 6th one together. I'm just
Is it? Yep.
excited to see what we're going to explore here today together.
Okay, on a personal note, just need to find out. So on your video that I'm looking at the moment, it says James. So at what point do you like to be called Jim, and when do you prefer to be called James?
That's a good question. I guess on all my diplomas and in a kind of like an educational or professional standpoint, I've always been, James C. McDannald. But just, once you get to know me, I guess I just usually, that's kind of like the name my parents gave me was, the kind of the James, but then just Jim to like, friends and family and to people I'm close with. So like, at this point,
Okay.
Tyson, you're welcome to call me Jim. I will see how that changes. Maybe our relationship will, flux and you'll become like more of a James sayer, but we'll see.
I might do that episode 8 when I do the introduction. And we go, and with me today is James. James, how you doing?
well,
It? So what is our topic of discussion today?
well, I mean, just getting back to that point real quick, though, I mean, the audience will
Yeah.
probably notice and kind of wonder what's happened in our relationship. So maybe we'll just see that kind of mystery sometime down the line. But no, like last week, we talked about your content matrix, and today we're going to kind
Yeah.
of dive into more specifically why kind of an ad hoc or kind of on the fly fly lack of system is something that just is less than ideal, and what are the kind of points of failure of commonly seen in different podiatry clinics, either I've worked with or I have heard about. So
So you're going to talk more about like planning instead of just winging it.
yeah, 100%. Like, why don't we just jump in and like do all the things at once, right? Like, you've heard that Facebook is great. So why don't we just go do our page now, like start making posts? Like, why do we just step back a little bit and have kind of more of a clear vision about what we want to achieve before we just kind of like I said, do all the things. So
Yeah, well, this topic fits in really well, following up from the content matrix. It is hard to say, isn't it? Because that was like visually looking at everything. So what you're saying is before you even look at a platform or some form of marketing, is thinking about what you want to achieve first.
Well, I think it's one of those things where, like, we see our colleagues doing certain things. You see the clinic down the road doing something, and it's kind of, we live in kind of a FOMO world, even more than just in marketing.
Yeah,
Whether it's like the Lambos on Instagram or the everyone looking perfect on TikTok or some other platform, we just feel like, why aren't we like that? Or why aren't we, doing that? Because at least on the surface, it looks successful. So I guess it's just trying to get a general sense of like what's working now, and like what are people trying to achieve with what's out there, and kind of like what I've seen as far as like, what are the blind spots that we have? Because obviously we all went to school to be, foot and ankle doctors. Some of us diverted from the path and became marketers later, but what are
yeah.
those kind of like ways, kind of the pitfalls to avoid, as you're building out that content matrix, and how can you learn from some of the things I've seen in other clinics, um, you know, kind of not necessarily fail with, but just they're not seeing a benefit. Like you hear a lot, I did Google ads for a month. I had a $200 budget and I didn't see anything happen. So therefore, like Google ads doesn't work for me or for my clinic or in my area when I know that, work somewhere else. So there's some biases or some like kind of flawed thinking, I think, that sometimes goes into, why some of these channels fail. I don't think all of them work, but I think there's some pretty consistent, kind of like flawed logic to like why people give up on certain things, but just keep pushing in other areas that maybe aren't as high return on an investment.
Do you think, well, I think what you said before too, I think you mentioned Lamborghini, but there's so much BS on social media platforms where, and you do, and sometimes, and I know what it was like when I was younger and you see people living in houses you don't live in yet, driving cars that you don't drive, and they look and they smell so much better. And you think, well, what did they do? What did they do to get there? And even though I think there is a path that you can follow, there's a successful path, but what works for their practice and what works for them doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you.
No, that's
So you've got to be careful not to just copy what everybody else is doing.
No, definitely. Like there's no like one true marketing plan or blueprint that's going to work for every clinic. Like we talked about in your previous show, right? Like there's different demographics, there's different kind of like type of care you want to provide. So it's kind of like, experimenting in some different areas, avoiding the pitfalls and kind of building out kind of that ideal plan for yourself. Like I said, like one of the biggest points of failure that I see with a lot of people is, either not being kind of like basically trying to dip their toe into like different forms of marketing, just doing
Yeah.
something for either a short period of time, let's say like a month or two, and then also like just at not an adequate amount of budget. And it can be scary, right? Because Google does want to spend your money, right? Like whether whether it
Yeah.
puts, butts in your clinic seats or not, like they're more than happy to like, you know, spend that the money you have in a way that doesn't necessarily feel like you totally understand about how they're, why are they showing an ad in a certain place? Like what are the keywords you're advertising on? There's a lot of kind of like technical details. And what Google does now is really try to make it like super simple for doctors or for people in their clinic staff to make them feel like they're have an easy way to get those new patients. But in reality, like
Yeah.
Google's happy just to kind of like spend money that doesn't necessarily lead to like new patient appointments. So you have to have a very tactical mind and have the kind of like not a long-term vision, but at least like a 6 to 12 month vision about it gradually ramping up. And with a reasonable budget. So like I would say that unless you're living in a super small town or small area, like a starting budget would be somewhere around $500 a month in Google Ads spend, up to like, $2,000 to $3,000 a month in a bigger metropolitan area, in order to really see a return on investment, in something like a Google search ads campaign.
Yeah, well, I was doing some work with some dentists a couple of years ago, and one of them used to spend between $3,000 to $5,000 a month in Google ad spend. And I said, "Wow, that's a lot." I said, "What's your returns?" And they said, 10 times." They said, "We're spending it. We know we get 10 times back." And it's because they measured everything as well. And at a certain point, they stopped doing it because they thought, maybe we don't need to do it now. It's just that sort of work is going to keep coming through. And it didn't. Whenever they stopped, the patient numbers coming through stopped as well. So they did sort of rein it in a little bit until they eventually got around to 2 to 3,000 because they kept testing different things, and then they figured out what was working and they just kept running with it.
I think you bring up a really good point there is you need to have some metrics around these things. I guess I'm giving a mini Google Ads tutorial today, but like, for example, you need to know how much you're paying per kind of like patient visit. And there are ways up until recently, you've been able to kind of say, okay, like for $20, that's leading to a phone call per phone call, or $50 per new patient appointment. There's different ways of measuring that within their system that you're not going to get on the kind of like, I would say like not to be demeaning, but like kind of the dummies Google ad version. You have to do the kind of like
Yeah.
pro setup in a way. And like you'll see, like, if you work with agencies or people that are not necessarily like focused on your clinical results, you're going to get a lot of metrics, focused on like this many people saw it or this many clicks happened, but not necessarily that attribution that you're looking for. You want to know how many, are you getting return on investment from these things? So, either working with somebody or just learning it yourself a little bit can really be helpful as far as honing in on those metrics, that prove that it's getting that 10x like you talked about. But that's where I see that the biggest mistakes happen is that people are advertising on what I would call high competition keywords. For example, if you try to advertise, let's say you're in New York City and you try to advertise for the term plantar fasciitis, number one, you're going to get a ton of educational clicks. Plus, you're going to be
Yeah.
going against probably some major manufacturers like Dr. Scholl's, other insole makers, probably some like, quackery, like kind of like, I don't know, salves and other stuff to put on your heel pain, maybe even some like surgical, surgery centers that are trying to pull people in for either shockwave. I mean, that's not necessarily like, I'm not trying to demean those people for advertising on there, but like you're gonna spend a lot of money for not a true patient that's actually like hot to kind of like make an appointment for you in your local area. So that how you build a strategy around that and how you build metrics, like you talked about, Tyson, is hugely important to see with like whether you think that like, well, I spent 2 months and $100 and it didn't work, I'm moving on versus like,
Yeah.
I ramped up slowly with someone that was an expert or I learned to become an expert. And I see the value because like, I would say that Google search ads is one of those areas that can be a little tricky, and feel like it's not working pretty quickly if you don't know the right parameters, to use in that system.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said, though. They can just outsource and have somebody do it. But I believe when I've done my marketing workshops, one of the points that I mentioned is you've got to be in the game and you've got to understand the rules of the game. So to just get money handed to somebody and go, here, do all this for me, you don't know whether they're doing the right thing or not. So I think it's really important to learn a little bit about Google and how it works so you understand the rules of the game and how you don't necessarily want to do it yourself. You just want to learn it so that when they do hand it off to somebody else, that when they're doing it and they're talking to them about, oh, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is what we're thinking of doing next, talking strategy, you actually understand it. And I think that applies to old school marketing as well. If you're talking to a sales rep from a newspaper or TV or radio, you should need to understand, especially newspaper, positioning, loading, color, fonts, headlines. You need to have a basic understanding of that so you don't get ripped off.
100%. It's like, I think that's the funniest thing about some of these different Google and other platforms it's like going to Costco in North America, right? Like they're always kind of moving the food around the store. So you
Yeah.
can't just get into your kind of normal routine, like get what you need and go, right? They're going to like stack up the import beer is like right there, like, where your old, where the, over by the vegetables now, or you thought the toilet paper was over here and it's over here now. They do the same thing inside of like Google, Facebook, other places. They're constantly changing their platforms to like, not necessarily game you, but like make you have to be involved in a way in order to optimize it. You have to be engaged consistently and be aware of all these changes they're making. Cause let's say you set it and forget it, which I think a lot of, is not an uncommon thing for some podiatrists that are kind of like, well, I can learn Google ads. I can do it myself. I'm just going to like do it myself. And that's fine. But just know that like every month or 3 months, you log back into your account, there's going to be 30 different things that Google's done in the interim to try to make it more difficult for you. They've already didn't ask your permission, but have automated something or added something
Yeah.
that's causing another like $200 a week in spend. Like they are, I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble. Maybe they're going to, search this podcast and I'm going to get like,
they're going to shut you down.
right, exactly, get blacklisted. But they're happy to like extract funds from you and put it into their pockets. We'll put it that way.
So I can easily say, oh no, I don't know James.
But it works. Exactly. You know Jim, you don't know James.
Yeah, I know Jim. I don't know this James guy, not the troublemaker.
But
So,
yeah, that's enough harping on that side of things before I get in trouble with Google. But I think that's
oh
important
no,
thing.
no, but I think you make a good point. I don't know if I've told you the story or not. I was at a breakfast meeting and it was a breakfast business meeting, a networking event. So we're all there having breakfast. Everything's great. All of a sudden this young dude turns up on a scooter, as you do. No, it's a skateboard actually. Turned up on a skateboard because that's how I like to arrive to a business business breakfast. Anyway, walks in with his skateboard, parks it up against the wall. So I'm starting to chat away to him. I said, so what do you do? Oh, I do Google and Facebook advertising. Oh, really? Okay. He's got his best t-shirt on, board shorts. And I said, oh, how long have you been doing that for? He says, oh, well, to be perfectly honest, I really don't know what I'm doing. He said, but I've got a couple of clients who'll pay me a couple of grand a month and I'm learning as I go. And that is what scares me when people don't think and plan what they're going to do with the marketing, plan who they're going to talk to. If all of a sudden they go, oh, podiatrist down the road, I saw a Google ad, therefore I must do it. And they just jump on anybody thinking everybody's the same, just like every podiatrist is the same. Not.
No, 100%. I think, like you said, you just have to kind of do your due diligence and kind of understand that, like this wouldn't, like, I would say that a lot of that kind of like, um, like shisty behavior happens because like the platform does actually work. If you give them the right parameters and the right settings,
Yeah.
like it will generate patients. Like if the person's doing it right. So like And it used to be the fact that like people that didn't necessarily know what they were doing could also get results because it was, I would say, more on the user friendly side, but it's become a very like time intensive optimization game within their platform now that it's very difficult. But like switching,
So you say my skateboard buddy is going to be finding it tougher now to
I
do
don't
it.
know. I don't know how, is he logging in every day? Is he out on his board
I don't
for a
know.
month and then checking back in to see those campaigns? It's, I'm not going to like, I'm a guy that works from home now. I'm not going to slam him for trying to live that life. But at the same time, yeah, you probably want someone that's, is intimately, understanding of your situation and, your practice and the kind of clinical benefits you're trying to gain from that. I think, related to the Google and the Facebooks and all these things that like, part of it's that there's all these different tools that are coming out consistently, right? I think it can be a bright, shiny objects thing, whether it's TikTok or Snapchat or whatever the kind of new shiny object is on the course. I think people need to be aware of what those things are, but like
Yeah.
rapid, like changes of course or not thinking out in like more, like I said, 6 to 12 months timeframes and like gradual ramp ups or trends in behavior, because even with a like a great running like Google or Facebook campaign, you're going to have ups and downs. And if you're just like, you got to down that first month and you feel like it didn't work, like, you got to let things run a little bit and kind of be, not just kind of like dipping your toe in necessarily if that's something you want to try. But that,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, but it's similar to other areas. It's no different to business coaching. I know the longer I work with someone, it just gradually just keeps their practice just gets better and better and better. Now we could do a 3 month stint and they're going to get improvement. But when you do 6 months, 12 months and longer, the improvement it keeps going up. And they would have to think exactly the same way. Picture a new graduate that's coming to work with you. They're not awesome from week one. Occasionally you get the odd one that is, but very rarely. It's the first 3 months, they're okay. The longer they work with you, the better they get, the more productive they are. So I think your marketing applies exactly the same way. In your Google ads, so with this, from your point of view, apply the same if you were advertising on Facebook, Instagram, same sort of process. You're doing it over a period of time and building. What's people getting to know, like, and trust you to keep seeing those ads popping up.
yeah. I mean, it's like, I think the biggest thing is that like nobody, at least like that have worked with in the past, like they don't like, people don't want to be a nuisance, right? Like they don't want to feel like
Yeah.
they're not providing some type of value to someone that's either watching something or their face is on something, and they don't want to be that annoying, like, advert that like really is not providing any value. I think there is, and it's normal, I think, because like, a lot of us, like I've talked to you previously, like we trained in hospitals, we kind of have that mentality, put our head down, work really hard, and people are going to find our door. And for certain people that might work, but for the rest of us, most people, you have to make people aware of the great care you provide. And if you're providing great care, like that's a huge value add in those people's lives. You're helping change their lives or make their lives better. So this kind of like shyness around putting yourself out there, it's understandable, but I think it's something that can be, worked on over time. I think yeah, that's a huge component of it. It's just like kind of getting over the fact that like you want to be seen as that expert, and there's these channels can help you do that. Probably the last area I want to touch on real, quick before we wrap up today, is the fact that there's like no one perfect plan, for every podiatrist out there. And I think that's a bit of a failing, is that like, we kind of want a cookie cutter recipe, of like,
Yeah.
okay, like even with, I have a general idea, like the services I can provide for people, but like not every person's going to, every clinic's get the exact same thing because the needs are going to be different. So like, I think it makes sense to, if people are either doing it themselves or, like a self audit, or they're working with somebody else, is to know that like that audit process and, trying to identify where you're really strong and where you're really weak at, and kind of, doubling down on those strengths and kind of working on some of those weaknesses, is really, really important. Because let's say like you've got a, like you got a leaky website, right? Like you don't have a clear path for people to, it looks clear to you, right? Like you have like a contact us button, or, like a phone number that's not actually clickable on your website. There's ways of like, assessing what you're currently doing to make those things, 10% better. And if you can make
Yeah.
10% improvements along all the different things you do, I mean, it's kind of could be an exponential change in your practice. So I think gaining some outside perspective and not just kind of like, whether it's engaging with an outside provider yourself, is just starting off any relationship with more like an audit for someone to say like, these are the areas where you're doing all right and we can kind of like improve, versus like, these are areas that are, whether it's email marketing or review gathering, where you're not doing it all, that could really help build your name in your local area. But until you either gain the knowledge to be able to do that yourself or work with someone else, like, it can be a bit of a blind spot because, like I said, you're working your clinic, you're at the you're in the OR, you're, dealing with HR issues in your own clinic. Like, there's a lot going on, and to be able to like step back from your own practice and have that perspective, even with me, the services I provide, I still seek outside perspectives because like I'm in the weeds. I'm working with these clinics and I don't
Yeah.
always have that, I don't know, 10,000 foot perspective, or even what I'm doing with people sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of where I leave it, is like, an audit is better than just someone being very prescriptive and saying like, these are the 5 things we're going to do with you because this is what we do for everybody. Like, I would avoid
Yeah.
any situation like that.
That's a really good point to finish on. And the last thing I want to tell people too, it goes back to something you said earlier, where sometimes you can just, podiatrists look at what other podiatrists are doing and they think, well, they must be doing great because of this, this, and this. And, I know a lot of podiatrists and I've worked with some that I know their business is okay. The business is, it's okay. It's not great. It's just okay. But they have extremely wealthy parents. So because they have wealthy parents, they've been able to, say, buy a building, and then they've bought the building or had it built, and they've put up this beautiful signage. So on the surface, if you're another podiatrist that went through with them through university and look out, wow, they've only been out 5 or 7 years and they've got this massive big clinic they've built that just looks absolutely spectacular. They've got footwear in there. They've got staff. What they don't know is the parents have given them a ton of money to do all this. Now, their business is at that level. It's good enough to just maintain it, but the business was never good enough to actually own that.
I,
So without the family help, so a podiatrist sitting back, just looking at their fellow graduate who's done this and thinking, wow, whatever they're doing, I need to just copy what they're doing, is not going to work for them.
I think that's a huge, huge learning there, Tyson. And it kind of tipped off one other idea I wanted to share real briefly before we take off is,
Yeah.
don't work in isolation, right? Like, don't take my word for it. Don't take Tyson's word for it. I mean, you can if you want to, but who are those co-residents you worked with, or who are those people you went through podiatry school that you spent those nights out on Friday or Saturday night, and they now have their own practice. I think it can be very
Yeah.
easy to fall into the like, you're the owner of that practice, so you should know everything. And like, you don't want to like not necessarily show weakness, but like, it's okay to like leverage your relationships and like build connections with other people in similar situations like you, whether it be, something like Tyson, where he has these cohorts and these different things he works with people with. If you don't feel comfortable kind of with your own cohort, but if you do have those podiatry school friends or those residency colleagues where you can just share like, I'm struggling with this, or it doesn't have to be marketing related, but just opening levels of, communication and dialogue with people. So you're not trapped in this this isolated tower of like, my practice is here, I have to have all the answers and I just have to do it myself. Because if you're going to do that, like, I mean, God bless you if you're like a person that can like, take that all on your own shoulders. Like, that's fantastic. But I think there's strength in numbers and trusting and building those relationships with other people and showing a little bit of vulnerability. You'll learn so much. I think that, whether it's from me or for Tyson, from someone else, like, I think I would really leave it today to like, build those connections with people to learn from their mistakes as well. Like, if you're, they can learn from yours and you can learn from theirs.
It's like they say, dig the well before you need the water.
100%.
Is make these connections. Don't wait until you're dying. Don't wait till you're dying of thirst to try digging a well. You're going to be dead before you dig it. So the same thing, make connections with people, make connections with us, and other people in the profession, and other people have businesses that may not even be podiatry. You can learn so much from them as well. But make these connections so that when you do have questions, there's people there you can ask. So James, I think that brings this episode to a close. This has been, once again, a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Tyson. I think you and I could rap about this stuff for 2-3 hours, but we're gonna, for the benefit of the listeners and the viewers, we'll kind of keep it in these bite-sized chunks. But yeah, thanks again. It was definitely a lot of fun.
Short and sweet. Okay, I'll talk to you next week.